Did you do this to get pity?
Shut up! You don't deserve to know!
A simple woman is laughed at for her scars, until a veteran freezes at her unit tattoo. Roll your sleeves down, sweetheart. Customers are trying to eat. The fork clattered from a booth near the window, and every head in Mel's diner tilted the way sunflowers follow light. Sarah Miller didn't look up. She steadied the coffee pot the way she steadied herself, chin tucked, shoulders square, voice even. "Yes, sir," she said, and poured. The man who'd spoken, hard hat on the vinyl seat beside him, steel-toe boots propped too wide, smirked at his crew. "See? Trained." His name tag from the construction site read Morrison, Chad, in block letters that thought they were bigger than they were. A bell dinged. Plates slid to the pass. Sizzle, hiss, the diner's heartbeat kept time against the morning traffic on Route 17. The red neon open sign buzzed in the window like a tired wasp. In the corner, a man no one noticed was noticing everything. Michael Kelly cupped his coffee like it was warmth he could carry. 18 years of quiet questions had taught him how to read a room. The way a waitress rotated her hips to save her lower back, the way a busboy kept his eyes on his hands, the way a line cook breathed through the rush, and the way Sarah moved, efficient, economical, exact, like someone who'd learned long ago that hesitating cost more than it saved. "Hey," Chad said louder, to be sure the whole diner heard him. "What happened to your arms anyway? Cat fight with a meth pipe? Or you just like attention?" A couple at the counter froze mid-sip. The old man in the fedora didn't turn his head, but his jaw tightened. Sarah's tray didn't wobble. She slid plates down, 2 short stacks, 1 Denver omelet, extra salsa, and kept her eyes on the order tickets as if they were a map out of weather. Michael set his cup down. He'd seen that posture before, the stillness of a medic under shelling. "Come on," Chad prodded, leaning into the aisle so she had to brush by him. When she did, his knuckles snagged the cuff of her sleeve. The cotton gave with a soft, traitorous rip. Silence, sudden and absolute, replaced the clatter. Scars, pale and roped like rivers on an old map, ran from Sarah's wrist up toward the line where the sleeve had torn. But it wasn't the scars that stole Michael's breath. Ink, clean and stark, curved just below the crook of her elbow. A rocketing arrowhead over a blue and white stripe. A battle tab where only a medic would place it, and a date burned into memory. Ramadi, 2006. Michael stood so fast his chair squealed against linoleum. His voice came out before he knew he'd found it. "3rd Infantry Division," he said, the vowels dry as dust. "Ramadi, summer, 06. Sarah's eyes finally lifted to meet his. For a second, the diner fell away. No neon, no hiss, no hard hat laughter, just desert heat, diesel exhaust, and a siren that wouldn't stop. Her throat worked. "How do you know that?" Michael's hand, shaking now, dug a creased photo from his wallet and laid it, face down, on the counter. When he flipped it, the past stared back. A burned-out Humvee, smoke like a bruise, and the blurred shape of a medic running into the fire. He looked at her the way a man looks at a miracle. "You pulled me out." The morning sun slanted through the broad windows of Mel's diner, painting the cracked vinyl booths in honeyed light that didn't quite reach the corners. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee clung to the air like old wallpaper, familiar to every regular who shuffled in from the cold streets of this Midwestern town. Trucks rumbled past on the highway outside, their downshifts growling in rhythm with the jukebox that hadn't worked since the Iraq War was still on the news every night. Sarah Miller knew this space better than she knew her own apartment. The pattern of the floor tiles, the weight of the glass mugs, the squeak of the third hinge on the kitchen door, each was as known to her as the weight of her scars beneath her sleeves. She moved between the tables with a poise that belied her reputation. To the customers, she was the scarred waitress, an object of speculation and cheap jokes. But in her own head, each step was deliberate, disciplined. Her father had called it squad rhythm when he taught her to keep steady under fire. Old habits from old lives didn't wash away easily. Sarah was 34, though her eyes often looked older, burdened by what they had carried. Her hair, tied back in a no-nonsense bun, was the shade of burnt copper, fading in places. Beneath her uniform, white blouse, black slacks, lay a map of wounds earned far from the quiet chatter of breakfast rushes. The scars had branded her more deeply than any ink could. She wore them like armor now, though the world insisted on seeing them as disfigurement. The regulars had settled into a cruel rhythm of their own, a whispered comment here, a pointed glance there. They didn't know the story, but they didn't need to. The visible was enough. The ropey tissue along her wrists, the way she never let the sleeve slip too far. People assumed what they wanted, and in their silence, Sarah bore the weight of their judgment. Then there was Michael Kelly, sitting alone near the window with the posture of a man who'd once stood watch through long, dangerous nights. At 41, his face bore lines deeper than his age justified. His hair had gone gray early, a badge of years spent in desert sun and sleepless barracks. He wasn't there for the eggs or the bitter coffee. He came for something else, though even he hadn't known what until the moment Sarah's sleeve tore. Michael carried his own ghosts. A Humvee explosion in Ramadi had stolen part of his hearing, his friends, and almost his life. For 18 years, he had been searching, not consciously at first, but with the restless itch of a man who owed a debt unpaid. In a worn photograph tucked inside his wallet, a medic sprinted through fire, dragging a broken body to safety. The medic's face was blurred, but the tattoo was clear. He'd been chasing that mark across every VA hospital, every cinderblock veterans bar, every reunion where someone might remember. Now, here it was, inked on the arm of a waitress in a town where nobody looked twice at her except to sneer. Around them orbited the others. Chad Morrison, the loud-mouthed construction foreman who made himself the star of every room he entered, and his crew, who laughed not because the jokes were funny, but because they feared the silence that followed defiance. The old couple at the counter, retired farmers with soft voices and harder memories, who never quite had the courage to stand up, and Bob Hutchinson, the diner's owner, a Vietnam vet whose limp had grown heavier over the years and whose sense of responsibility had grown lighter. He thought he was protecting Sarah by letting her keep her job, but his silence had cut as deeply as any insult. The diner itself was a character too, walls lined with faded photos of high school football teams, a flag from Desert Storm gathering dust in a frame, a shadow box with medals donated by families who didn't know what else to do with them. For Sarah, the space was both sanctuary and prison, a place to earn a wage, but also a daily stage where her scars became public spectacle. And yet, beneath all of this ordinariness, a secret pulsed. Sarah was no broken creature abandoned by fate. She was a combat medic who had once thrown herself into a burning vehicle to save a man she thought had died anyway. She carried both the scars of that fire and the guilt of survival, never imagining that the man she saved was alive, and sitting 10 feet away, staring at her with recognition dawning in his eyes. This was the stage, a small-town diner, a scarred woman hiding a hero's past, a veteran haunted by a life-saving ghost, and a bully about to learn the cost of cruelty. The pieces were in place, the air charged, the truth waiting only for the courage to step forward. The breakfast rush had thinned to a lazy trickle, the kind that left a diner half full of silence. Forks scraped plates, coffee cups clinked, and in the lull, Chad Morrison decided he was bored. He sprawled in his booth with the posture of a man who believed the room belonged to him. His crew clustered around, their reflective vests hung carelessly over chairs, boots leaving streaks of mud on the linoleum. They laughed too loudly at nothing, their voices scraping against the quiet like steel on steel. Sarah approached with a pot of coffee balanced steady in one hand, 3 refills already memorized. She was practiced at ignoring men like Chad. She knew the weight of their stares, the smirk waiting to crawl across their faces, the insult sharpened and ready. She poured without looking up, her sleeve brushing the edge of the table. Chad leaned in, blocking her way. "So tell me, sweetheart," he said, voice oily, loud enough for the counter to hear. "What happened to you? Run into a fire, or was it a needle this time?" The laughter that followed wasn't genuine. It was nervous, a chorus of men afraid to be silent. Sarah's hand didn't tremble, though inside her stomach coiled. She straightened, tugged the cuff of her blouse lower. "More coffee?" she asked flatly. Chad chuckled. "You hide under those sleeves like you're some kind of mystery, but I'll bet it's uglier than any of us can imagine." His eyes flicked to his crew, daring them to laugh louder. They obliged. At the counter, the old couple lowered their eyes to their toast. Bob Hutchinson, polishing a glass behind the register, shifted his weight, but said nothing. Michael Kelly, still in the corner booth, watched, his fingers curled against his coffee mug, knuckles whitening. But he waited. He needed proof before he spoke. Sarah tried to step past, but Chad thrust an arm out, pretending to reach for sugar. His hand brushed her sleeve and deliberately yanked it up. The fabric gave way with a rip. Gasps broke the quiet. There it was, the raw truth, etched in scar tissue, pale ridges that spoke of fire and pain. The diner seemed to hold its breath, and beneath the scars, sharp and unmistakable, ink bloomed. The unit tattoo of the 3rd Infantry Division, Ramadi, 2006. For a beat, no one moved. Sarah's face flushed, her eyes dropped, her arm trembling as she tried to tug the sleeve back down. Chad broke the silence with a laugh too loud, too cruel. "Look at that, boys. She decorated the burns. Thought she'd make herself pretty." The laughter came again, forced, brittle, but it came. Michael stood. His chair scraped back, harsh against the floor. He crossed the diner in 3 strides, voice cutting like a blade through the din. "3rd Infantry Division," he said, every syllable clipped. His eyes locked on Sarah. "Ramadi, summer of 2006? Sarah froze, her breath caught. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his. Chad snorted. "What, you some kind of tattoo expert? Don't tell me you're impressed by this freak show." Michael ignored him. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a photo so worn its edges curled like leaves. He laid it on the counter. The image was grainy, but clear enough. A burning Humvee, smoke choking the air, and the blurred outline of a medic dragging a body through the flames. On the medic's arm, the same tattoo. "That was me," Michael said softly, pointing to the limp figure being dragged. His voice dropped to a whisper only Sarah seemed to hear. "You pulled me out." The diner went silent again. The air was thick, electric. Sarah's lips parted, words forming, but failing. Her hand shook as she gripped the tray. For 18 years, she had carried the weight of believing the soldier she saved had died. For 18 years, she had borne scars not just of fire, but of guilt. Tears welled. She nodded once, a broken, trembling motion. "I thought you didn't make it." Michael shook his head. "I did, because of you." Behind them, Chad scoffed, desperate to reclaim control. "What is this, a reunion? Cute little war story. She's still just a waitress with burns. Don't glorify her." Michael spun on him, eyes hard, voice like command fire. "Shut your mouth." The authority in it, honed by years of rank and battle, silenced even the bravest chuckle. Chad faltered, his smirk cracking. For the first time, the room wasn't laughing with him. It was watching him. And Sarah, trembling but standing straighter now, was no longer just the scarred waitress. She was the medic who had walked through fire, revealed in front of all of them. The sound of Chad's laughter dissolved, swallowed by a deeper roar that lived inside Sarah's bones. In the split second after Michael's words, the diner's tiled floor blurred into sand, and the hiss of the coffee pot became the crackle of burning fuel. She wasn't in Mel's diner anymore. She was back in Ramadi, Iraq. Summer of 2006. The air had been thick with heat, grit coating her teeth and skin, no matter how often she rinsed from the canteen. Sarah Miller, then Specialist Sarah Miller, combat medic of the 3rd Infantry Division, sat in the shade of a blast wall, scribbling notes in her field journal. Her sleeves were rolled up then, her arms still whole, sunburned and strong. The convoy had been routine: patrol to the outskirts, check supply routes, return before sundown. Routine in Ramadi meant tense silence punctuated by bursts of chaos. Everyone knew it. No one said it. She had been humming softly, the tune her father used to whistle when tightening bolts on the farm back in Kentucky. She thought of home a lot, not because she wanted to escape, but because the memory steadied her hands. Then the world exploded. The lead Humvee vanished in a ball of flame, the ground shuddering beneath her boots. The concussion wave slammed her against the wall, her breath punched from her lungs, ears ringing, vision seared white. She scrambled upright. "Medic!" The call cut through the chaos. It always did. Sarah didn't think. She never did in those moments. Training had carved action into instinct. She grabbed her kit and ran. The second Humvee was burning, flames licking up through the hood, black smoke curling thick into the sky. Soldiers swarmed, some firing toward unseen rooftops, others dragging bodies into cover. But one figure was still inside, trapped. She saw him through the windshield, his head slumped, his legs pinned. Michael Kelly. Sarah didn't know his name then. She only knew a soldier was alive and dying in front of her. "Cover me!" she shouted, diving into the inferno. Heat swallowed her instantly, biting at her skin, curling her hair into brittle strands. She slammed her shoulder into the jammed door, pried it open with bare strength and desperation. Her hands found his harness, yanked until muscles screamed. He groaned, a faint sound, but it was enough. She dragged him free just as a secondary explosion ripped through the engine. Metal shrapnel tore across her back and arms, slicing deep, searing flesh. She dropped, curling over Michael's body, her own frame shielding him from the blast. Pain detonated through her nerves, hot and merciless. When the smoke cleared, they were both alive. Barely. Sarah remembered little after that, hands pulling them both to safety, morphine in her veins, the world dimming. She remembered thinking, he won't make it, but at least I bought him a chance. Then darkness took her. She came back weeks later in a field hospital, wrapped like a mummy, the smell of antiseptic drowning out the memory of fire. Surgeons saved her, but the scars became her inheritance. Her unit moved on, her brothers in arms redeployed, and by the time she returned stateside, Michael Kelly's name had been lost in the fog of records. Worse, whispers followed her. Burned up, discharged early, damaged goods. She fought to stay in, but the Army decided her body had given enough. Medical retirement. Thank you for your service. Goodbye. Back home, the scars told stories no one wanted to hear. Neighbors stared, children pointed, employers hesitated. She traded her fatigues for diner uniforms, her battlefield for counters and coffee pots. The world had shrunk from deserts and explosions to pancakes and pie slices, and she accepted it, believing the soldier she saved was dead anyway, believing her sacrifice had been in vain, until today, until this diner, until Michael Kelly stood and spoke the words that broke 18 years of silence. Back in the present, Sarah's breath shuddered as the memory faded. She wiped her eyes with the cuff of her sleeve, though it was useless. Her voice cracked, but carried. "I thought you were gone," she whispered, staring at Michael. "I thought I failed you." Michael shook his head slowly, his jaw tight, his own eyes rimmed with wet. "You didn't fail. You carried me out of hell. I've spent 18 years trying to find the medic who saved me. I thought maybe she died too, but you're here." The diner was silent. No clink of silverware, no shuffle of plates. Every person present, Chad, his crew, the old couple, Bob behind the counter, watched as the story rewrote itself before their eyes. The waitress they mocked wasn't a victim of shameful mistakes. She was a soldier who had chosen fire over safety, sacrifice over self. Sarah straightened, her back trembling but unbowed. For the first time in years, she let her sleeve fall fully, exposing scars and tattoo alike, no longer hidden, no longer a mark of weakness. Chad's smirk faltered. The weight of the room was no longer with him. It was against him. Chad cleared his throat, trying to summon back the bravado that had always carried him. "So what? She's got a tattoo. Big deal. Doesn't change what she is now. A waitress hiding behind a counter." But the words fell flat. The laughter from his crew didn't come. They shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Sarah's scars and Michael's steady stance. The power Chad fed on, fear, amusement, submission, had evaporated. Michael stepped closer, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through steel. "You think those scars make her weak? They're proof she's stronger than you'll ever be. While you were picking fights in bars, she was pulling soldiers out of fire." Chad sneered, but it lacked conviction. "Don't preach to me, old man. She's still just serving eggs." Sarah's tray trembled in her hands, not from fear this time, but from the pressure of something long buried breaking free. She set it down on the counter with a soft clatter. "Enough." The word was quiet, but it carried. Everyone turned. Sarah's shoulders, hunched for years, straightened. Her eyes, always lowered, lifted to meet Chad's head on. "You don't get to tell me what I am," she said, her voice steady, each syllable shaped like steel. "I know what I've done. I know who I saved. and I know the price I paid. You can laugh at my scars all you want, but they're the reason someone else is still alive to stand here today." She gestured toward Michael, who nodded silently. The diner seemed to exhale. The old man at the counter murmured, "Damn right." His wife squeezed his hand. Chad tried to speak, but his throat caught. The eyes of his own crew were no longer with him. One of them muttered, "Let's just go, man." Sarah took a step closer, her chin high, her voice rising with a force that silenced even the neon's buzz. "I carried a soldier out of a burning Humvee while my skin burned off my back. Tell me, Chad, what have you ever done that compares?" The question hung in the air like a hammer. Chad's mouth opened, closed. No answer came. Bob Hutchinson, who had been silent behind the counter too many mornings, finally spoke. His voice cracked, but it carried the weight of his own service. "She's a hero, and I was a coward for letting anyone treat her like less. That ends today." Applause started softly, from Michael first, then the old couple, then the entire diner. It wasn't just for Sarah's past, but for her standing tall in her present, for reclaiming her name, her scars, her story. Chad pushed back from the booth, muttering curses that no longer held teeth. His boots scuffed the floor as he stormed out, his crew following like shadows drained of color. The door slammed, but the sound couldn't erase what had shifted inside those four walls. Sarah stood, breathing hard, tears glimmering but unshed. For the first time in 18 years, she wasn't hiding. She was seen. She was whole. The diner settled into a hush, but it wasn't silence born of fear anymore. It was reverence. Forks clinked gently against plates, coffee steamed in forgotten cups, and yet every pair of eyes clung to Sarah as if she had just grown taller before them. Michael reached into his worn leather jacket and pulled out a small, creased photograph. The edges were frayed, the colors faded, but the faces, young, dust-covered, resolute, still looked out from the desert sand. He held it up so the room could see. "This," he said, his voice heavy with memory, "was taken in Ramadi, summer of 2006, 3rd Infantry Division. Half the men in this photo didn't come home. I shouldn't have either." He placed the picture on the counter, sliding it carefully toward Sarah. Her hand hovered above it, trembling, before she let her fingers brush against the faces she once knew. Michael continued, his tone deepening. "Our convoy was ambushed. The blast tore through the Humvee like it was made of paper. I was trapped, bleeding out. The fire was coming fast. My brother screamed for help, but no one could get near, no one except her." He pointed at Sarah. The room inhaled as one. Sarah closed her eyes, memories rushing back in flames and smoke, screams and sand. Michael's voice grew tighter. "She crawled into the wreck, through shrapnel, through fire, and dragged me out with her bare hands. She laid her own body over mine when the second explosion hit. That's why she bears these scars." He gestured to her arms, her neck, the hidden burns beneath her uniform. "Because she shielded me with her life." Gasps rippled through the diner. An old woman covered her mouth with both hands. One of Chad's crew, lingering near the door, muttered, "Holy God," before slipping away in shame. Sarah shook her head, her voice cracking. "I thought you were dead. They told me no one survived that second blast. I carried the guilt all these years, believing my sacrifice wasn't enough." Michael stepped forward, his eyes glistening. "It was enough. It saved me. It gave me 18 more years. 18 years to watch my daughter graduate, to hold my grandson in my arms. 18 years of life because of you." Her breath caught. For so long, she had worn her scars like shackles, each mark a reminder of pain, of failure, of a man she thought had been lost. And here he was, standing whole, bearing witness. The diner erupted, not in noise, but in something deeper. A weight lifted, replaced with awe. The old veteran at the counter rose to his feet, saluting Sarah with a trembling hand. Others followed, first one, then many, until half the room stood in unison, hands to brows or over hearts. Bob Hutchinson, the diner's owner, swallowed hard and stepped out from behind the counter. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. We all do. I hired you to pour coffee and bus tables, but I should have been honoring you as the hero you are. From this day forward, you're not just an employee, you're the manager of Mel's. And if anyone so much as breathes disrespect in your direction, they'll answer to me." Applause thundered. Tears rolled freely down Sarah's face, though her posture remained strong, her chin lifted. For the first time in years, she let her sleeves fall back, exposing the full map of burns and scars. And instead of whispers, there was applause. Instead of pity, there was pride. Michael placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You carried me out of fire. Now let me carry your story into the light. The world needs to know what you did." A young man at a booth pulled out his phone, live stream still running. "They already do," he said softly. "Thousands are watching, and they're all calling her a hero." Sarah blinked, stunned. The same scars she once hid were now shining across countless screens, no longer marks of shame, but of sacrifice. The old couple approached her. The man, his voice gravelly with age, said, "We've been eating here 20 years. We watched people laugh at you, and we stayed silent. That was our failure. But today, you reminded us what courage looks like. Thank you." His wife pressed Sarah's hands between hers, whispering through tears, "You saved more than him. You saved all of us from forgetting what real bravery means." Sarah bowed her head, overwhelmed. "I was just doing my duty. That's all." Michael shook his head firmly. "No, you went beyond duty. You gave everything. And now it's time for the world to give something back to you." The diner, once an ordinary roadside stop, had become a cathedral of memory and honor. The air itself seemed charged, every neon flicker and coffee pot hiss carrying new weight. Sarah, who once shrank into the shadows, now stood in the center, bathed in the recognition she never asked for but always deserved. The climax wasn't the explosion in Ramadi. It wasn't the scars or the laughter. It was this: a woman reclaiming her name, her worth, her life. And as the applause swelled again, Michael leaned close and whispered words only she could hear. "You're not just the reason I lived, Sarah. You're the reason I learned what living really means." Her tears broke free at last, but they were not of shame. They were the tears of a soldier who had finally come home. The applause was still echoing when the heavy glass door of Mel's diner swung shut behind Chad Morrison. He had stalked out moments earlier, red-faced and sputtering, but the silence that followed his exit was deafening in its judgment. The man who only minutes ago swaggered with cruel confidence was gone, leaving behind the stench of his arrogance. Michael sank back into his booth, eyes steady on Sarah, while the rest of the diner seemed to exhale as one. A waitress whispered, "About time someone shut him down." Another customer muttered, "All that big talk, and he ran like a whipped dog." But it wasn't just talk. By evening, the live stream that had captured everything had spread across social media like wildfire. Clips of Chad jeering at Sarah, then her scars, then the revelation of her tattoo were replayed millions of times. The comments came in torrents: condemnation, outrage, calls for his employer to act. Within hours, Chad's name trended nationally, not for the buildings his company had raised, but for the way he had tried to tear down a woman who had already given everything. By the next morning, the blowback had arrived. His construction firm, battered by thousands of angry emails, phone calls, and canceled contracts, terminated him on the spot. A local news anchor, voice sharp with disgust, declared, "In this city, we don't tolerate those who mock our heroes." For Sarah, the vindication was not in seeing Chad ruined, but in realizing she no longer bore the weight of silence alone. She hadn't asked for revenge, hadn't raised her voice in anger. It was truth itself, her scars, her service, her sacrifice, that had leveled him. When Chad eventually returned months later, gaunt and humbled, the man was unrecognizable. Gone was the swagger, the smirk, the casual cruelty. In his hands was a plain envelope, and in his eyes something rawer than shame, remorse. He told Sarah of the months he spent as a volunteer at a veterans center, how he had scrubbed floors, cooked meals, and listened to stories that broke him down and built him back up. He held out the envelope, $5,000 he had raised on his own. His voice cracked as he said, "I can't erase what I did, but I can start with this." The diner hushed again. Sarah looked at him, at the trembling hands offering reparation. Slowly, she nodded. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said. In that moment, the arrogant bully had fallen completely, not crushed by fists or fury, but by the weight of truth and the quiet mercy of the woman he once mocked. The diner was different now. Where once Sarah had hidden her arms beneath long sleeves, she now carried her scars openly, the faded ridges catching the morning light as she poured coffee or scribbled orders on her notepad. They were no longer marks of shame. They were badges of survival, etched into her skin like medals no one could ever take away. Bob Hutchinson, true to his word, had promoted her to manager. She handled schedules, supplies, and the younger waitresses who looked to her not just for guidance, but for courage. "If she can stand tall after all she's endured," one of them whispered, "then so can I." Michael visited often, sometimes with old comrades, sometimes alone. Every time he walked through the door, his eyes went to the tattoo on Sarah's arm, the one that had once saved his life in Ramadi, and now had saved hers in a small-town diner 18 years later. They never spoke of it much, but the bond between them was unshakable, forged in fire and carried into peace. The scars of the past lingered, but so did the healing. Chad Morrison's fall had rippled outward, a reminder that cruelty would not go unanswered. His attempt at redemption, the envelope of money, had not erased the harm he caused, but it had planted a seed that even the most broken men might find their way back. Sarah's quiet acceptance of his apology was not weakness. It was strength, a testament to her belief that the world could be remade, one act of grace at a time. 6 months later, Sarah stood by the window of the diner just before dawn. Outside, the street was empty, except for the flag at the courthouse down the block, stirring in the wind. She traced the edge of her tattoo absently, remembering the night she had crawled into fire to pull a man out. The years of silence that followed, the laughter and cruelty she endured, and then she thought of Michael's steady voice, the applause that rose like thunder, and the moment she had finally said aloud, enough. A car door slammed outside. The morning crew arrived, chattering, waving to her through the glass. Sarah smiled, a soft, unguarded smile. She turned away from the window and slipped into the bustle of the diner, her scars bare, her head high. The world hadn't erased her pain, but it had finally begun to see her. And in that recognition, Sarah found not just healing for herself, but hope for everyone carrying unseen battles. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is survive. Sometimes the bravest thing a survivor can do is be seen. Sarah had done both.